The wind had teeth tonight. It worried the edges of the pines and gnawed at the seams of the world, pushing powdery snow across the path in quick hissing sheets. Every few breaths it found a gap in Garen's scarf and bit his throat hard enough to make his eyes water. He kept his head down and his lantern low, watching the way the flame bent sideways as if it wanted to crawl into his coat for safety. The last of the traps were set. The last of the firewood was stacked. The last of the village lights were far behind him, swallowed by the forest and the early dark. And still he'd taken the long way home because the long way meant he passed the creek. The creek meant he could check the ice. Checking the ice meant he could pretend he was doing something useful instead of returning to an empty cabin with a cold stove and a silence that rang like a bell. The creek's song was muted now, choked beneath a lid of blue-white ice. Garen knelt and set his lantern down beside his boot. He pressed the tip of his axe into the surface and listened to the answer, a solid thunk with no spiderweb crackle. Good, the village had been hauling water from here all week, and if the ice failed, a gust slammed into him from the side, stealing his breath. The lantern flame flattened, snow stung his face. Then he heard it, not the wind, not the creak of trees, a sound that didn't belong in winter, a ragged, human-like whimper. Garen went still. He lifted his lantern higher, letting its circle of light widen over the creek bank and the drifted brush beyond. "Hello?" he called, voice swallowed almost instantly. Another sound closer this time, a shuddering inhale like someone trying to breathe through pain. His first thought was of wolves, his second was of drunks. His third was the one he didn't want, someone from the village, stupid enough to wander out here alone, injured and freezing. He pushed through the brush, boots crunching, axe ready without him deciding it. And in a hollow between two snow-loaded boulders he found a body curled like a question mark. At first he thought it was a bear cub, wrong shape, wrong stillness. Then the lantern light caught skin, gray-green, mottled with cold, dusted with snow, a broad shoulder, a thick braid half undone and stuck to the ice. An orc woman, she was wrapped in rags that had once been a cloak, the fabric torn and stiff with frost. Her hands were bare. One wrist was bruised purple as if a rope had bitten into it. Her lips, full, cracked, moved without sound for a moment, then gathered whatever strength she had left and forced words out. "I'm freezing," she rasped. "Let me stay with you, I beg you." Garen's first instinct was to back away, not because he'd ever fought an orc, he hadn't. But the stories had been fed to him since he was a boy. Orc raids on old roads, orc mercenaries who took payment twice, orc women who could snap a man's spine with one arm and laugh about it afterward. The older folk said orcs didn't feel cold the way humans did, that they were made for harsh places. The woman in front of him made every story look foolish. She shook so hard her teeth clicked audibly. Her eyelashes were rimed white. When she tried to lift her head, it wobbled and dropped again. "Please," she whispered, and the word came out thin as if even begging cost her. Garen swallowed. He glanced around tree line, brush, shadow, looking for movement. Nothing, just wind and snow. He crouched, keeping a careful distance, lantern held out. "What are you doing out here?" he demanded. "Where's your camp?" Her eyes, amber, surprisingly clear, flicked up to his face. They were too bright for someone so close to death. "No camp," a cough that sounded like cloth tearing. "No one, I ran." "Ran from what?" She stared at him a moment too long, then she gave a small, defeated shake of her head. "Not important." It was the wrong answer. It was the answer liars gave. Garen should have left. He should have walked away and told himself it wasn't his concern. If she was trouble, he'd bring it home like a fox with mange. But she was trembling harder now. Her breath came out in thin puffs, too shallow, and there was something in her posture that didn't fit the word trouble, not predatory. Not cunning, just tired, like the world had already taken whatever it wanted from her and tossed the rest into the snow. She tried to push herself up, failed, and her head hit the boulder with a dull knock. Her eyes rolled, unfocused. That decided it. "All right," Garen muttered, mostly to himself. "All right, don't die on me." He moved in, bracing his feet, and slid his arm behind her shoulders. She weighed more than any human woman he'd ever carried, dense with muscle even now. But she was limp with cold, and her skin burned against his glove with a feverish chill. As he hauled her up, her hand shot out, reflex, fear, and grabbed his sleeve with surprising strength. "Wait," she croaked. Garen froze. "What?" She blinked slowly, fighting the darkness at the edge of her eyes. I'll reward you," she said, as if it were the one coin she could still spend. "I promise." He almost laughed, a short, humorless sound. "You're half dead," he said. "Keep your reward." Her mouth worked. "No, I'm poor, but I can make it worth shh." He tightened his grip and began trudging back toward the path. "Save your breath. You can pay me by not bleeding on my floor." She made a sound that might have been a sob, might have been a laugh, then her head sagged against his shoulder, warm breath dampening his coat. The forest pressed in around them. The wind clawed. Garen hunched forward, lantern swinging, and for a moment the only thing he could hear was the drum of his own heart, loud in his ears. He told himself over and over that he was doing this because leaving someone to die in the snow was wrong. He did not tell himself the other truth, that the cabin's silence had been unbearable lately, and the idea of another living breath under his roof, even an orc's, made something tight in his chest loosen just a fraction. His cabin sat at the edge of the tree line like a stubborn old man, shoulders squared against the weather. The windows were small and thick with frost. Smoke did not curl from the chimney, because Garen hadn't lit the stove before leaving. He cursed himself as he wrestled the door open with one shoulder, dragged the orc woman inside and slammed it against the wind. The air inside was cold, but it wasn't winter cold. It was the cold of neglected rooms and unlit hearths, still, stale, survivable. He laid her on the rug near the stove, rolled her gently onto her side, and yanked off his gloves. Her skin looked wrong in the lantern light, pale green gone ashy. Her fingers were stiff, nails chipped and broken. "All right," he said again, as if saying it enough times would make him competent. "All right, Garen, do something useful." He knelt and began building a fire with shaking hands, splitting kindling, stacking it like a careful promise. Sparks caught, licked up. The first weak flame appeared, then another, then the fire found its appetite. Warmth crept outward. He fetched his thickest blanket from the bed, returned and paused. Her cloak, what was left of it, was wet with snow, stiff with ice. He needed to get it off her. He needed to check if her feet were frostbitten. He needed to. She looked so small on his rug, curled and shivering, that the thought of touching her felt like an intrusion. Then she whimpered again, and the sound snapped him into motion. "I'm going to remove this," he said, as if she could hear. "Don't wake up and bite me." He tugged at the frozen fabric, gentle but firm. It peeled away with a faint crackle. Underneath, her tunic was thin and torn at the shoulder. Bruises bloomed along her ribs. There were cuts on her forearm, shallow but numerous like thorn scratches. Her wrists, both of them, carried those angry rope marks. Garen's jaw tightened. He warmed water in a kettle as quickly as he could, then soaked a cloth and began pressing it to her hands, her cheeks, her brow, anything to coax blood back into the surface. He did not rub, remembering a healer's warning about frost and flesh. He just held warmth there, patient. Her breathing eased a little, her shivering slowed, became less violent. When he lifted the cloth from her cheek, her eyes flickered open. For a heartbeat they were wild. She saw him, saw the cabin, saw the fire. Her body tensed and she tried to scramble backward with a sudden burst of strength born of panic. "Hey, hey," Garen held up both hands. "Easy, you're safe, you're in my cabin." She bared her teeth, a flash of tusk, and for a moment he understood why people told stories. Then her gaze landed on the blanket draped over her, on the steaming cup he'd placed within reach, on the axe leaning against the wall, present, yes, but not raised. Her shoulders sagged and something in her face crumpled. Her voice shook worse than her body now. "You brought me. Couldn't leave you out there," he said, gruffer than he meant. She swallowed, throat working. "Why?" Garen stared at her, genuinely confused. "Because you'd freeze." Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if the answer didn't compute. "Humans do," she coughed. "Don't help orcs." He felt the old village tales stir, that poisonous certainty. He pushed it down. "I'm not humans," he said. "I'm Garen, drink." She hesitated, then reached for the cup with both hands, fingers trembling. She sipped. The steam fogged her face. When she swallowed, her eyes closed like it hurt to feel warmth again. "What's your name?" he asked. She took a breath, and for a moment he thought she'd refuse. Then she said, "Rava." "Rava," Garen repeated. "All right, Rava, you've got rope burns and bruises. That tells me you didn't just get lost." Rava's mouth tightened. Garen leaned back against the table, arms crossed. "Are there people looking for you?" "No." The word came too fast. He held her gaze. After a long silence, she whispered, "Maybe." Garen exhaled. "I'm not asking because I want to hand you over. I'm asking because if someone comes pounding on my door with weapons, I'd like to know before it happens." Rava stared into her cup like it could answer for her. "They will not come," she said finally. "Not here. You sure?" Her eyes lifted, and in that amber gaze he saw not just fear but calculation, like someone measuring risk. "They think I'm dead," she said. Garen felt a chill that had nothing to do with winter. "Who thinks you're dead?" Rava's hand tightened around the cup. "My own." That was all she offered. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind battered the cabin like a thing trying to get in. Garen looked at her bruised wrists again, and anger rose hot and sharp. "All right," he said, "you're staying tonight. After that, we'll..." I can't stay long, Rava interrupted, voice urgent. Just one night, then I go. You're barely sitting up. I'll go, she insisted. Her eyes glistened, but her chin lifted stubbornly. If I stay, I bring danger. I will not repay your kindness with death. The word repay brought him back to what she'd said in the snow. I told you to keep your reward, he said. Rava blinked, confused. You said you'd reward me, Garen continued, trying to lighten it. Unless that was just desperation talking. Her face colored slightly, an odd dusky green flush. No, she said, and her voice grew firmer. I promised. Garen waved a hand. Don't worry about it, just don't freeze. Rava's gaze sharpened. Humans always worry about reward. Well, Garen muttered, humans are always hungry. Rava stared at him a moment, then let out a small sound, soft, surprised. A laugh cracked at the edges, but real. It startled Garen more than her tusks had, because it made her sound young, not young in years, perhaps. Young in the way grief hadn't yet settled into a person's bones until now. She drew the blanket tighter, and the laughter faded into a quiet, trembling sigh. Thank you, she said, and the words fell into the space between them like a fragile thing. Garen nodded, suddenly uncomfortable with gratitude. He busied himself instead, pulled out bread and dried meat, set it on the table, poured more water. Rava watched him like she couldn't decide whether to trust the scene. When he offered the food, she took it slowly, as if expecting it to vanish. She ate with careful bites, not the ravenous tearing he'd imagined an orc would do. Her hands shook less with each swallow. As warmth returned, more of her became visible, scar lines on her knuckles, a thin cut along her jaw, a faint tattoo curling around her collarbone like vines. What's that? Garen asked before he could stop himself. Rava's fingers rose instinctively to cover it. Nothing. That's not nothing, her eyes hardened. Human questions are endless. Garen lifted both hands in surrender. All right, none of my business. Rava studied him, then slowly lowered her hand again. It is. A mark, she said reluctantly, of clan. What clan? Her lips pressed tight. One I do not belong to anymore. The fire popped, throwing sparks. Garen considered the bruised rope marks the way she'd said my own, the urgency in her voice. You ran, he said quietly. Rava's jaw tensed. Yes. Why silence? Then she said very softly, because they decided I was useful. Garen felt his stomach turn. Useful how? Rava's throat bobbed. She stared at the floorboards. They said I would marry, she whispered, to make peace, to bind, to be traded like a goat. Garen's fingers curled into a fist. And you refused. I refused, she said, and something fierce flickered in her eyes. So they tied me. They said I would learn obedience. Her voice didn't break. It was too controlled, as if breaking would be worse than freezing. Garen swallowed hard. So you escaped. Yes, and they think you're dead. Rava's mouth twisted. I made them think I left blood. I left tracks into the river. I prayed the water would take the scent. She said it like a plan she'd rehearsed 100 times in her head. Garen stared at the fire. He felt suddenly very aware of his small cabin, his flimsy door, his lone axe. How far are your people from here? 2 days south, she said, but they will not look north. Humans hate us. They think you would kill me if you found me. Garen almost said some would. Instead, he said, the village would panic if they knew. Rava's gaze snapped to him. You will not tell them. He met her eyes. Not tonight. Her expression eased by a fraction, but fear still lived beneath it. Sleep, Garen said. Your body needs it. I cannot sleep, she whispered. If I sleep, I do not wake. That's not how it works. You do not know orcs, she said, voice small. When we are too cold, we choose rest, and the rest chooses us back. Garen didn't have a clever answer. He just fed the fire and sat near it, making himself a stubborn presence. Minutes passed, then an hour. The storm moaned and paced outside like an angry spirit. Rava's eyelids drooped despite her fear. She fought it, jaw clenched. Garen cleared his throat. If it helps, he said awkwardly, I'll stay up. Rava blinked at him. Why? He shrugged. I don't sleep well anyway. That was true in a way he didn't want to explain. Nights had been long since Mara died. Since the laughter left this cabin and the bed became too wide, since he'd started taking the long way home just to fill the hours. Rava watched him, then slowly, very slowly, let her head rest against the folded blanket. If you stay, she murmured, I will not owe you only warmth. Rava, I promised, she insisted, and her eyes closed. Reward, Garen sighed, resigned. Fine, tomorrow you can, I don't know, chop wood or something, that's payment enough. Rava's mouth twitched faintly. Wood, she whispered, like it was a joke she almost understood. Then her breathing deepened. The tension left her shoulders. She slept. Garen sat by the fire and listened to another person's breath fill his cabin for the first time in months. It sounded ordinary. It sounded like life refusing to leave quietly. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, warmth held. Morning arrived slowly, like it was reluctant to cross the threshold. Gray light seeped through the frosted windows. The storm had quieted to a steady whisper of drifting snow. Garen's fire had burned down to coals, and the cabin smelled of ash and damp wool. Rava still slept, curled under the blanket, braids spread like a dark river across the rug. Her color looked better, green returning, lips less pale. Garen rose stiffly, joints protesting from sleeping in a chair, and moved to stir the coals. He fed them kindling until flame caught again, then set water to boil. A soft sound behind him made him. Rava was awake, sitting up cautiously. Her eyes were sharp, scanning the room, the door, the windows, checking for danger. When she saw Garen, her shoulders lowered. "You stayed," she said. "Told you I would," Garen replied. He poured a mug of hot water with dried herbs, what little he had, and handed it to her. She took it with both hands, the gesture almost reverent. "You should eat," he said, "and then you should rest again." Rava shook her head immediately. "No, I leave," Garen frowned. "You can barely walk." "I can walk," she said stubbornly, swinging her legs off the rug. When her feet touched the floor, her face tightened with pain, but she did not make a sound. Garen watched, helplessly impressed and irritated. "You're not going south," he said, "not in this weather." "I'm not going south," she said. "I go east, to the old road. There are travelers." "There are bandits," Garen countered. Rava's mouth lifted in a humorless smile. "Bandits are honest. They tell you they will hurt you. Clans pretend it is love." Garen felt the same anger flare again, bright and dangerous. "You don't have to go alone," he said before he could stop himself. Rava stared. Garen cleared his throat, suddenly aware of how it sounded. "I mean, I can walk you to the road. Make sure you don't collapse in a ditch." Rava's eyes narrowed. "Why would you do more? You already did too much." Garen looked away, focusing on the kettle. Because if you die after leaving my doorstep, it'll feel like I failed to finish the job." Rava stared at him like he was a puzzle. Then she set the mug down and reached into the tattered folds of her cloak. Garen tensed, hand automatically drifting toward his axe. Rava's fingers emerged holding something small and dark, a pouch, leather worn. It looked empty. She extended it toward him. "My reward," she said. Garen blinked. "That's a bag." "It is all I have," Rava said, and there was pride in her voice even as shame flickered in her eyes. "I am poor, like I told you." Garen took the pouch reluctantly, expecting a few coppers at most. He loosened the drawstring and peered inside. It was not coins, it was a seed, one seed about the size of his thumbnail, black and glossy, with faint silver striations like lightning frozen in shell. Garen frowned. "What is this?" Rava watched his face carefully. "A winterheart seed." Garen's brow furrowed deeper. "Never heard of it." Rava's gaze shifted to the fire. "Of course you haven't. Humans do not go where it grows." "And where does it grow?" "In high places," Rava said. "In stone, in cold. It blooms only when it should not bloom. It survives where nothing else survives." Garen rolled the seed between his fingers. It was oddly warm despite its name. "What does it do?" he asked, skeptical. Rava met his gaze again. "It makes a tree that does not die in winter." Garen snorted. That's not possible." Rava's eyes flashed. "You think I would promise reward and give you a pebble?" He paused. He remembered her in the snow, promising like it was sacred. Remembered the way she'd insisted even when he told her to keep it. She didn't seem like someone who would lie about the one thing she could offer. Still one seed. "And why would I want a tree that doesn't die in winter?" Garen asked, mostly to cover his uncertainty. Rava's expression softened just a little. "Because you live alone," she said quietly. The words hit harder than they should have. Garen's throat tightened. "What does that have to do with anything?" Rava gestured vaguely around the cabin at the empty chair, the single plate on the table, the second mug that hadn't been used in months. "This house is cold," she said, "not only because of snow." Garen felt exposed, like she'd peeled back his walls and seen the ache behind them. He forced a scoff. "So your reward is a plant to keep me company?" Rava's mouth twitched. "Not company, protection, warmth, food if you know how to take it, and a promise." "A promise of what?" Rava hesitated. Then she said, "Winterheart trees grow fruit once a year when snow is deepest. The fruit heals." Garen went still. "Heals," he repeated, voice lower. Rava nodded once. "If someone is sick, it helps. If someone's blood is weak, it helps. It cannot stop death forever." Her gaze dipped. "But it gives time." Time. Garen's mind flashed to Mara, coughing into cloth, cheeks hollow, the village healer shaking his head with helpless sadness. To Garen holding her hand, wishing for more time the way a drowning man wishes for air. He swallowed hard. "And you're just giving this away." Rava's jaw lifted. "It is mine." How did you get it? Rava's fingers brushed the tattoo at her collarbone. Because I was not always poor, she said softly. The room seemed to tilt. Garen stared at her. You said you were poor. I am, Rava said. Now. Garen looked down at the seat again. It suddenly felt heavier, like a secret. What are you? He asked, and he meant it in every way. Rava's eyes were tired again. An orc who ran, that's not an answer. Rava held his gaze, then she spoke carefully as if choosing each word might change the world. My mother is the clan speaker, she said. My father is the war chief. They wanted to trade me to bind a rival clan. They wanted peace, but not for me. Garen's mouth went dry. Rava cut him off, expression hard. Do not say princess. Orcs do not have that word. Do not make it soft. I am a tool to them. I refused. I ran. Garen exhaled slowly, trying to fit this new shape around the woman he'd carried from the snow. So you're not poor, he said, because his mind clung to the simplest contradiction. Rava let out a bitter laugh. Money, armor, clan, family who would die for you, her eyes gleamed. All gone the moment you say no, that is poverty. Garen didn't have an argument for that. He looked at her wrists again. You could go back, he said, voice rough. Challenge them, fight. Rava's lips curled faintly. Fight my father, my brothers, my mother's words. She shook her head. Orc strength is not only muscles. She drew a breath and stood, swaying slightly. I leave now. Garen stepped forward without thinking. You can't go, not alone, not yet. Rava's gaze flicked to the door, then back to him. If I stay, you risk your village. They will not understand. They will fear. Fear makes cruelty. Garen knew she was right. He'd seen it, a stray wolf near the fence line, and men grabbed torches as if fire could solve every problem. A stranger at the inn and whispers spread faster than illness. And yet he looked at the seed in his hand. He looked at Rava, standing stubborn and bruised, refusing to be owned. You said the Winterheart fruit heals, he said quietly. Rava nodded. Garen swallowed. Then it's priceless. Rava's eyes widened slightly, as if she hadn't expected him to understand. Garen closed his fist around the seed. I won't take it. Rava stiffened. You must. No, Garen said, surprising himself with the force of it. If I take it, it becomes a transaction. You become a debt paid. I don't want that. Rava stared at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. Garen opened his hand again and held the seed out toward her. Keep it, use it to survive, trade it if you have to. Rava's fingers did not move to take it. Her chest rose and fell faster. You refuse reward, she whispered. I refuse your last hope, Garen corrected. For a moment, Rava looked like she might cry. Then her jaw set and she stepped closer, close enough that Garen could see the faint freckles of darker green across her nose, close enough that her warmth reached him. Then listen, she said, voice low and fierce. You will take it because I say so. Garen blinked. Rava lifted her hand and pressed the seed back into his palm, curling his fingers around it with surprising gentleness. I did not give you my last hope, she said. I gave you my first. Garen's breath caught. Rava continued, each word a quiet hammer. If I keep it, I will hide it. I will clutch it. I will fear to lose it. If you keep it, her eyes held his. Then I know it exists somewhere safe, somewhere warm, somewhere not ruled by ropes. Garen stared at her. Rava. He stepped back as if retreating from her own vulnerability. Plant it, she said, or do not, but keep it alive. Garen's voice came out hoarse. And what do you get? Rava's mouth curved, sad and stubborn. I get to imagine a tree in winter that does not die. Garen wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that imagining wasn't enough, but then she lifted her chin again and moved toward the door. Garen followed, grabbing his coat. You're not going without me, he said. Rava paused, hand on the latch. I told you danger. Then I'll be dangerous too, Garen replied. Rava looked at him and something like amusement flickered in her eyes again. You are a lumberjack with a leaky roof. I have an axe, Garen said. So do I, Rava replied, and she reached behind the door. Garen blinked in surprise when she pulled out his spare hatchet when he'd left there for chopping kindling. She held it up like a question. Garen stared. When did you? Rava's mouth twitched. Orcs do not sleep like humans. We listen. Garen couldn't help it, he laughed, a short sound that felt unfamiliar in his throat. Rava's expression softened at the sound, and for a heartbeat the cabin didn't feel so empty. Then she opened the door and cold rushed in like a living thing. They stepped into the white. The world outside was a sheet of pale light and sharp edges. Snow hung from branches like heavy wool. The path to the old road cut through the forest, a narrow line Garen had walked 1,000 times. Rava walked beside him in silence at first, her stride longer than his but careful, favoring her bruised side. Garen matched her pace, watching her from the corner of his eye. She moved like someone who expected betrayal from the earth itself. Each footfall tested, each glance measured. After a while Garen said, You'll need a story. Rava looked at him. A story? For travelers, Garen said. For whoever you meet, you can't just say you ran from your clan. Rava's jaw tightened. I do not like lies. Then call it strategy, Garen replied. Humans love strategy. Rava huffed softly, another almost laugh. What story? She asked. Garen thought, you're a mercenary looking for work that's believable. Rava's eyes narrowed. Humans do not hire orcs for honest work. They hire for dirty work, Garen said. That's why it's believable. Rava's lips pressed together. I am not dirty. Garen glanced at her, surprised by the sharpness in her tone. He chose his next words carefully. I didn't mean you, I meant what people assume. Rava exhaled through her nose. People assume many things. They walked on. As the trees thinned, the old road appeared, a wide, packed strip of snow that cut through the wilderness like a scar. Here, wind had swept it cleaner. Tracks were visible. A wagon's heavy lines from yesterday, the lighter tread of boots, the scattered prints of deer. Rava stopped at the edge of the road and stared down it eastward where it disappeared into white haze. This is where you leave, she said, voice strangely flat. Garen frowned. Where I leave you? Rava's eyes flicked to him. Yes. Garen hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth, a chunk of hard cheese, 2 pieces of bread, a strip of dried meat. Take it, he said. Rava looked at the bundle, then at him. More reward? No, Garen said firmly, just food. Rava took it slowly, like accepting it might be a trap. Garen shifted, uncomfortable. There's a trading post about half a day east. They won't like seeing you, but if you keep your hood up and your head down, Rava nodded once. I can do that. Garen wanted to say something else, something that mattered, something that didn't sound like a man pushing a stranger out into danger. He glanced down at his hand, feeling the seed in his pocket like a heartbeat. Rava, he said. She looked up. If you ever need a place, he said awkwardly, my cabin is still here. Rava's face went still. Then very slowly she reached up and tugged the collar of her torn tunic aside, exposing the tattoo at her collarbone. Garen blinked. Why are you? Look, Rava said. He leaned in, confused, and saw the tattoo more clearly. Curling vines, yes, but woven through them were symbols, small geometric marks that looked like a map if you stared long enough. Rava tapped one point. This is my clan mark, she said. Then she tapped another, slightly different. This is the Winterheart Grove. These marks are known only to those who inherit. Her eyes held his. They put it on me so I would not forget my duty, she swallowed. I will remember something else instead, she said quietly. Your cabin, your fire. Garen felt his chest tighten again. Rava lowered her collar, then did something Garen didn't expect at all. She bowed, not deep, not submissive, just a solemn dip of her head, respect offered freely. My people's way, she said. A reward is not always an object. Sometimes it is a name remembered with honor. Garen swallowed hard. I don't need honor. Rava's mouth lifted faintly. You say that like someone who has had too much of it, you have had none. Garen didn't know how she could see him so clearly. Rava turned toward the east, pulling her hood up. Then she paused and looked back over her shoulder. You will plant it? She asked, voice soft. Garen's fingers curled around the seed through his pocket. Yes, he said, I'll plant it. Rava's eyes brightened, just a flicker like sunrise behind cloud. Good, she whispered. Then she stepped onto the road and began walking, her figure shrinking into the white. Garen stood there for a long time, watching until the snow swallowed her whole. Only when she was gone did he realize his hands were shaking. He returned to his cabin feeling as if the world had shifted by a degree he couldn't measure. He went straight to the back of the house where the soil was hardest and the wind was blocked by the wall. He shoved aside snow until he hit earth, dark and stubborn. The seed sat in his palm, glossy as night. He hesitated. A Winterheart tree that did not die in winter, fruit that healed, a promise. Garen scoffed softly at himself. You're a fool, he muttered, planting magic seeds because an orc girl told you a story. But his hands were gentle as he dug. He placed the seed in the earth like he was tucking in something sleeping. He covered it carefully, packed the soil, then piled snow back over the spot to insulate it. He stood there, breath steaming, staring at a patch of nothing. He thought of Rava's bruised wrists. He thought of her laugh by the fire. He thought unwillingly of Mara and how he would have traded anything for one more season with her. Time, Rava had said. A Winterheart tree gives time. Garen went inside. Days passed. The winter held fast, as winter always did. Garen returned to his routines, chopping, hauling, checking traps, but something had changed beneath the routine, like a new thread woven into old cloth. He began leaving an extra mug on the table when he made tea, then catching himself and feeling foolish. He began keeping the fire better fed, as if expecting another cold body to arrive. He watched the road when he could, squinting into snow, half hoping for a glimpse of a hooded figure. He told himself it was just curiosity. Then 3 weeks later, he heard pounding on his door, not the gentle knock of a neighbor, a hard, urgent battering. Garen's heart jumped into his throat. He grabbed his axe and stepped to the door. "Who is it?" he called. A voice answered, strained, familiar. "Garen," it rasped. "Open, please." His hand froze on the latch. He flung the door open. Rava stood on his step, hood down, snow caked on her shoulders. Her face was thinner, her eyes were brighter. There was blood on her sleeve, not much but enough. Behind her the forest was dark and silent. Garen stared at her like she was a ghost. "I thought you," he began. Rava swayed slightly, then steadied herself. "I lived," she said, breathless, "but I was wrong." Garen pulled her inside without hesitation, slamming the door against the cold. "Wrong about what?" he demanded, helping her to the chair. Rava's jaw clenched. They looked. Garen felt ice crawl up his spine. "Your clan?" Rava nodded. "Not all." A small hunting party. They followed rumors. Traders saw an orc on the road. They spoke. Words travel. Garen cursed under his breath. Rava looked at him, eyes fierce. "I led them away. I circled. I hid, but they are close." Garen's grip tightened on the chair back. "How close?" Rava listened, head tilted slightly like she could hear through walls. "Not here yet," she said, "but soon." Garen's mind raced. Village, neighbors, panic, torches. He saw it all in a flash. If the clan found her here, they would not just take her, they would punish whoever sheltered her. He swallowed. "We have to move you." Rava shook her head. "No time." Garen stared at her. "Then what?" Rava's gaze flicked past him toward the back wall, toward the small window that looked out on the patch where he'd planted the seed. "Your reward," she whispered. Garen blinked. "What?" Rava's breath hitched. "Did you plant it where I told you?" "Yes," Garen said, confused. "But it's only been—" "Go," Rava said urgently. "Look." Garen hesitated only a heartbeat, then moved to the back window and scraped frost away with his sleeve. Outside, snow lay thick, and in the center of it, impossible, unmistakable, was a sprout. A single green shoot, straight and stubborn, rising from the snow like a finger pointing at the sky. Garen's breath left him. It wasn't just green. It pulsed faintly, as if light lived inside it. Behind him, Rava let out a shaky laugh, half relief, half disbelief. "It woke," she whispered. Garen turned slowly. That's not possible." Rava's eyes gleamed. "Winterheart is stubborn," she said, "like you." Garen stared at the sprout, and then his mind snapped back to the pounding danger that would arrive soon. "What does it mean?" he demanded. "It's a plant. It won't stop." Rava pushed herself to her feet despite his protest and limped toward the back door. "It means," she said, voice tight with pain and urgency, "that the grove listens to its seed." Garen's stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" Rava opened the back door and cold rushed in. She stepped into the snow, Garen following, axe in hand. She knelt beside the sprout with reverence that made Garen's throat tight. Then she placed her palm on the snow-covered earth. She closed her eyes. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the ground trembled. Garen stumbled back, eyes wide. Snow shifted. The earth beneath it seemed to inhale. And then slow, cracking, inevitable, something rose. Not a full tree, not yet, but roots. Roots surged beneath the snow in thick, pale cords spreading outward like veins. They pushed up in a circle around the cabin, forming a low barrier, twisting, weaving, hardening into something that looked like living wood. Garen stared, mouth open, as the roots locked into place with a sound like deep laughter. Rava opened her eyes, sweat on her brow despite the cold. "The Winterheart Grove," she whispered, "protects what shelters it." Garen's hands shook so badly his axe wobbled. "You," he started, then stopped because he had no words that fit. Rava swayed and Garen caught her before she fell. "It's not forever," she gasped. "Just enough. Enough time." Garen's mind flashed again to Mara, to wishing for more time, to Rava's earlier words. He held Rava close, feeling her tremble, and looked at the living barrier that now encircled his cabin like a wall grown from the earth itself. A howl carried from the forest, distant, not wolf. A voice, guttural and harsh, shouting something in a language Garen didn't know. Rava's body went rigid. "They're here," she whispered. Garen pulled her inside, slammed the door, and braced it. The cabin suddenly felt smaller. The air felt heavier, charged with something old and wild. Outside, shapes moved between trees, dark figures, broad-shouldered, fast. Orcs. Garen's heart hammered. He gripped his axe so hard his knuckles went white. The first of them burst into the clearing and stopped dead at the root barrier. They stared, shouting. One swung an axe at the living wood and the blade bounced back with a jarring crack. Another tried to climb it. The roots shifted, tightening, and he fell backward with a surprised grunt. They circled angry and confused like wolves that had found a fence where there should have been none. Inside, Garen stared at Rava. They can't get in. Rava's face was pale, not quickly. And after, Garen demanded, Rava's eyes met his. After they will wait. Garen's mind raced. Wait meant siege. Waiting meant the village might notice. Waiting meant then Rava spoke, voice steadier than her trembling hands. They think humans would kill me, she said. Let them keep thinking. Garen frowned. What? Rava's gaze sharpened. If they believe I am inside, they will not leave. If they believe I am dead, they might. Garen stared at her, understanding dawning with dread. No, he said immediately. No, we're not doing that. Rava's mouth tightened. We must. You said you wouldn't repay kindness with death, Garen snapped. Don't start now. Rava flinched, then lifted her chin. Not your death, she said. Mine as far as they are concerned. Garen's breath hitched. You want to fake your death again? Rava nodded once. But this time I need a witness. Garen stared at her, horror and admiration twisting together. You're insane, he whispered. Rava's eyes were fierce. I am free. Outside, an orc shouted again, voice closer, angrier. Rava grabbed Garen's wrist. Her grip was steady now, iron beneath trembling flesh. Listen to me, she said. I do not want to run forever. I want to disappear, not as prey, as choice. Garen swallowed hard. How? Rava's gaze flicked to the hearth where the fire still burned bright. Smoke, she said, ash, blood if we must, and your seed, your tree will hide our tracks. Rava stared at him. You said your cabin was a place, she said softly. If I ever needed, I am here. Garen felt something in his chest crack open like ice breaking on the creek. He thought of the village, of the way fear spread. He thought of Mara, of loneliness. He thought of Rava in the snow, begging not for gold, not for power, just for warmth and one night of safety. He looked at the root barrier outside, the impossible proof that something old had chosen his cabin as worthy of protection. He met Rava's gaze. All right, he said, voice low and steady. We do it your way. Rava exhaled, relief trembling through her. And Rava, Garen added, gripping his axe tighter. Your reward isn't a seed. Rava blinked. Garen glanced at the extra mug on the table, at the chair by the fire, at the quiet that didn't feel so sharp anymore. It's the fact that you came back, he said. Rava's expression softened, and for a heartbeat she looked like she might cry. Instead, she bared her tusks in a grin that was more brave than joyful. Then, she whispered, let us be stubborn. They moved quickly, Garen scattering ash near the back window, Rava tearing a strip from her sleeve and pressing it to a cut until it bled just enough. They opened the back door and Rava whispered again to the sprout, hand trembling on the threshold. Outside, the roots shifted, parting like a mouth opening. Garen stared, stunned. The grove listens, Rava murmured and stepped through. Garen followed. They slipped beneath branches under snow-heavy boughs, moving in the shadowed space where the forest swallowed sound. Behind them, Garen heard shouting, then a roar of anger as smoke began to curl from the chimney. He'd thrown green wood on the fire before leaving. It would smoke thickly, making it seem like the cabin was burning hotter than it was, like something violent had happened inside. The orcs would see smoke. They would smell blood, they would imagine the rest. They ran, not far, just far enough to reach the old stone outcropping where the ground was hard and cold and the trees grew thin. Rava pressed her palm to the rock, whispering in that strange, low language. The Winterheart roots, far behind, tightened their ring. They waited, breath held as shouts echoed, as the forest carried anger like a storm. Then slowly the sounds began to move away, voices shouting to each other, footsteps crunching as the hunting party retreated, dragging their certainty with them. Hours later, when silence finally settled again, Garen let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Rava leaned against the stone, eyes closed, exhausted. Garen looked at her, at the bruises, the stubbornness, the strange courage that had turned a seed into a wall. You're not poor, he murmured, half to himself. Rava opened her eyes, they were tired but bright. I am, she said, but now I know how to be rich again. Garen frowned. How? Rava's gaze drifted toward the direction of his cabin. Rich, she said quietly, is a place where you are not owned. Garen swallowed, feeling the weight of that truth settle into him. When they returned to the cabin at dusk, the smoke had cleared. The root barrier had relaxed into the earth again, leaving only the sprout, still standing green against snow, stubborn as a promise. Garen stared at it in the fading light. Rava stood beside him, silent. After a long moment, Garen said, so about staying one night. Rava's mouth twitched. One night, she echoed. Garen glanced at her. Seems like you're bad at leaving. Rava's laugh this time was fuller, warmer, still rough at the edges, but alive. Seems, she said, like you're bad at being alone. Garen wanted to deny it. Instead, he opened the cabin door and stepped aside. The fire inside crackled ready. Rava crossed the threshold and the cabin's silence changed shape, not gone but softened, shared. As Garen shut the door against the winter, he felt, for the first time in a long time, that the cold outside was simply weather, not the whole world. And in the patch behind the cabin, a tiny green shoot stood tall in snow, holding the kind of reward that didn't fit in any pouch. A future that refused to die in winter.